Hi, everyone. I'm Mercedes, and today I'm so excited to be talking to Jackie Jesko. She's an award-winning director, producer, and journalist. We're here to talk about her powerful new documentary feature film, Barbara Walters Tell Me Everything. The film follows the life and legacy of Barbara Walters and her monumental career that redefined broadcast journalism forever. First off, I would love to know more about how the documentary came to be. How did this project begin for you?
It actually began with a phone call from Imagine, the production company who made it. They asked me if I wanted to talk about a new film they were developing about Barbara Walters, and I was jaw on the floor. I was so
Yeah.
excited. I spent the first 10 years of my career as a TV news producer. The first couple of those years at ABC News, so obviously I was aware of Barbara and how important she was to
Mhm.
pretty much the history of American broadcast television news. So I was, really excited to be able to dig in on a story like that.
Yeah, definitely. Did you have any specific initial goals or intentions when you started the project, specifically when it comes to crafting the narrative arc, or did it all really unfold naturally through production?
No, I definitely like came in with you know, doing a film about somebody who's already passed away. You kind of have a finite amount of things to work with. And what we
Hmm.
had that was really special was access to ABC's incredible trove of archive about,
Yes.
featuring Barbara over 50 years of television or 40, whatever she was at ABC, but a long time. And we were getting somewhat carte blanche access to that, right? And
Yeah.
so I knew that the story I wanted to find was going to be in that material because that's what was going to set this apart and make it special. And a big part of that was, me knowing as a former TV producer and television news producer that there would be outtakes, there would be sort of off the cuff
Hmm.
moments that we could mine, um, and try and like find these little moments where Barbara was really being herself in front of the camera. Um, and, that was a big focus for us, certainly. And then also just sort of, expanding out certain interviews or like basically making scenes, like documentary scenes out of the raw footage from some of her bigger interviews, like the Gaddafi interview or
Hmm.
the whole Sadat Begin thing. Just really like seeing what exists and like mining it and like find a way to make it feel like a verite film.
Along with this, the incorporation of Walter's own voice to tell parts of her story was a major highlight for me as I watched. How did it come to be? How was it something that you knew you wanted to use from the beginning?
No, I was actually afraid there wasn't going to be much of that.
Hmm.
I wasn't sure how many interviews she had done. She wrote this amazing autobiography
Yeah.
Audition, but she never did the audiobook for it, which is,
Okay.
was a challenge. Oh man, like, I don't know what exists out there in the world of her being interviewed. But, through our amazing archival producing team, we were able to find, I'm not really sure how many interviews, but let's go with like 8 or 9 really good ones of varying length that we were able to use. And I was really happy we were able to do that because it was nice to have her be able to narrate her own story. It felt right. And so once we had those tools, it was kind of just went off from there.
Definitely. And what was the process like for going through all the archived interviews and footage? How long did it take?
I mean, that was the biggest part of the whole project was just,
Yeah.
it's like not only going through it, but then deciding which parts you want to use, like what
Hmm.
stories you want to tell. Because I mean, we were talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interviews that Barbara had, filmed at ABC and other places as well. Like, what are the beats of the story? Um, and I mean, part of that was just in assessing how strong the footage was. Um, like the assessing how strong the footage was for each of these important interviews and like seeing if there was anything really special kind of hiding inside. But then part of it was just reading Audition and discovering what Barbara thought were the most interesting, moments of her career because it's not always the
Right.
celebrity stuff. She actually really loved to do political leaders.
Hmm.
And she was really immensely proud of some of those interviews. And so that was also part of the beginning was just like, okay, well, what would she put in this? Like, what does she think was the best standout thing? And how can we, kind of work backwards from there?
There's a strong balance in the film between the interviews with people close to Walters, archived interviews, and the audio from Walters herself. What was the process of determining what to use and when, and how do you craft that balance? Is this something that is planned in pre-production or during the edit and post?
That was 100% post,
Okay.
editing post, because, there's some things that Barbara talked about herself very well. And a lot of that
Mhm.
was the storytelling, right? And it was useful in things like her time at the Today Show when we don't have a contemporary who could speak to that, right? Like
Yeah.
nobody was there next to her. I mean, unfortunately, they're all passed on by now. That was in
Hmm.
the mid 60s. So part of it was just like, who do we have that has firsthand knowledge or has something important to add to what we're seeing? So that, like, putting Katie Couric in the NBC Today Show makes sense, right? She was the anchor of the Today
Right.
Show, like things like that. So we kind of figured, like, when should people come in? Like, when did they come in to the
Mm.
story? And a lot of it was literally when they came into the story. um, so that was part of it. But then also, like, she wasn't amazing, or she wasn't willing to be open about some of her self analysis. And
Hmm.
so we would rely on other people to do that. But that could also just be, we're not all the best people at analyzing our own selves. So either it
That's
was just
true.
she wasn't capable of it, or she didn't do it on tape. I don't know.
And I'm sure you have so many favorites from the archived interviews, but I'm curious to know which interviews really drew you in the most. Were there any that you found yourself returning back to, whether it be because of the interview itself and the questions she asked, or it was because of the outtakes that you uncovered that gave more insight into her?
My favorite interview of Barbara's is with Fidel Castro. It is like the
Mm.
1976 trip to Cuba, where she went and they talked and they shot for, I think, 24 hours straight.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
we weren't able to use a huge amount of it in the film, unfortunately. So it's one of those things. I'm like, oh, that's too bad. But like, the footage itself was so interesting. It was this incredible snapshot in time. The chemistry between the two of them was insane. And she was able to push him out of his comfort zone. Like, she was really
Mhm.
driving the car in that whole thing. Like, I
Yeah.
felt like she was in control, and she was also like at the height of her power. Like, obviously, like, I wasn't like around for a lot of Barbara's time on television. And so in my
Mhm.
cultural memory, she's a much older woman, like kind of on The View or whatever.
Right.
So it was really nice to see her as like a younger field reporter, doing her
Yeah.
thing and like bossing around the cameramen. I thought that material was amazing.
Definitely. Definitely. Who is someone you would have liked to see Walter's interview today?
Ooh. Um, I don't know. I mean, maybe Donald Trump. I mean, they had a
Mm.
long friendship. And
Hmm.
she did this great interview with him in 1991, where she really like held his feet to the fire about his bankruptcies. And I
Hmm.
think that, I don't think she'd back down today.
Definitely not. And it'd be a good callback to those original interviews too. The film offers a nuanced look at Walters because her life was truly so complex, and the narrative framing around the dynamics of her career versus her personal life was a major through line. And I really appreciated how it focuses on her feelings around career and motherhood without judgment around her choices compared to the norms of the time. How intentional was that decision when crafting the narrative arc?
So intentional.
Hmm.
This was like a section we struggle with a lot, or I struggle with a lot personally as well. I'm a working mother. Betsy West, the executive producer of the film, is a working mother. Sarah Bernstein, the head of Imagine, is a working mother. And like, one thing none of us wanted to do was just have that same old trope of, oh, women really can have it all.
Hmm.
Where at the same time, you have to respect that Barbara lives in a different time. And
Yeah.
not that everything is fixed now, but it was worse. It was
Hmm.
harder. Um, and so, I really appreciated Oprah's insight in that section,
Yes.
because I think the two of them, have comparable careers in terms of power, reach, name recognition, and the challenges that you would face as a result of that. Um, but you're right. Like, I don't judge her for her choices at all. I think that she loved her work, and that's what she wanted to do. And, I honestly don't think if she could go back and change anything that she would.
Walters at one point says that what made her stand out professionally early on is that she not only wrote her own questions and reached out to people herself for interviews, but she also had an active part in editing. And she really understood production, and that's such a major marker of her success. And I really agree that having an extensive knowledge and skill set in more areas than one only elevates your work. And you have a vast background in TV news production. How does your expertise in that area influence your filmmaking styles and methods?
I think it's more about information gathering than
Mm.
it is about the style of making things. Like, I love to research everything I'm doing deeply. I want to know all the answers first, or maybe know more than the subjects expect that about a topic or a thing.
Mhm.
Um, so I bring that journalistic sensibility to everything I do. Whereas like I do feel like getting into documentary was an opportunity to let the creative wings, like fly free.
Hmm.
It's a tortured metaphor, but you know what I mean. I like just to sort of do different, like experiment creatively, whereas that wasn't
Right.
always available in the news industry. But I still think that the same sensibility of figuring out a story and deciding how to tell it, like that was all skills that I built through working in journalism.
We here at the Light Leaks, we really appreciate candid conversations about the realities of funding and financing films because it's so complex. For this film, since you worked with ABC News Studios, what did funding look like and how did it differ from financing other independent projects?
Yeah, I mean, this was, funded on the front end, I guess, as you would say,
Mhm.
meaning that it was commissioned by ABC News Studios and they paid for it. They
Okay.
funded the budget for it. So it wasn't very complicated in terms of getting it funded. I've done one independently funded thing at this point,
Mhm.
and that's, obviously it's a very different thing. Like there's different people to answer to,
Right.
and then there's of course the unknown of where is this going to end up.
Hmm.
Something I'm actually going through right now with that project.
Okay.
But I think ultimately at the end of the day, I think the reality is that there's always someone you're going to have to answer to in some way,
Right.
shape, or form. And so knowing that's good going in, not having these unreasonable expectations that you can do whatever you like and no one's going to have any notes or something.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that's just making anything for the most part.
Yeah, definitely. And along with being a director, producer, and journalist, you're also a co-founder of the production company Latchkey Films. How does that role
Correct.
influence your filmmaking process and motivations during production?
Um, I'm not sure that it always does make a
Mm.
difference. I mean, what's great about it is that I have, trusted partners that I've worked with for a long
Yeah.
time. One of them is actually my husband.
Oh, cool.
And like it's nice to have like we trust each other, and
Hmm.
so like in terms like we don't typically work on the same projects actually. Like I'll honcho
Okay.
something over here, honcho something over there, and our other partner honcho something else. Um, but it's nice always having kind of like a group of people that you can come back to and all of your
Mhm.
interests align and you trust their taste. That's all great. That's definitely the upside of the process. But I guess the downside is that you run a business, and then
Hmm.
you really have to learn what that is, and that's hard. And it's a learning curve, and it wasn't a natural skill set that any of us actually had. So there was a huge learning curve for sure. But now we're in our fifth year, and so I think we're finally getting into a groove. But
Yeah, that's awesome. In the film, there's audio of Walters explaining what she says to young people who want a career like hers. Hearing that inspired my next question. I would love to know what advice you have for women in non-binary documentary filmmakers early in their careers.
my piece of advice would be just to know that access is everything.
Mm.
Um, if you're not somebody with enormous connections or something like that, you can still be the one to get to tell a story if you're able to develop a relationship with the people at the center of the story. This is not relevant to the Barbara Walters documentary, actually, but for
Mhm.
someone who is starting out and not, going to leap right into a celebrity biopic, I think that it's like good to know that like that is your cachet at that point is your ability to tell the story, and if you have it, then maybe you're going to be the one who gets to tell it. So
Yeah, that's great. And lastly, what's your hope for what you'd want audiences to take away from watching Barbara Walters Tell Me Everything?
my hope is that people get to know a person whose face they know, whose character on television they know. But I hope that they walk away feeling like they maybe got a sense for who she was as a person,
Hmm.
what was going on in her mind, as she's asking questions of all these luminaries, rich, powerful, famous people. And sort of, the journey that it took for her to get to be the person she was, which I think is inspiring in its own way, and then it's also like one other thing I think is really interesting about Barbara, and we had to be the last thing she said essentially was that she's definitely a feminist icon in the sense that she shattered all these glass ceilings. But I think it's truthful and correct
Yeah.
that she didn't do it for the sake of all women. She did it
Hmm.
for herself. But that's okay. Why would
Yeah,
we ask it for it to be for all women? Like the reality is she still shattered those glass ceilings and other women benefited.
that's
So
true.
great. You know what I mean? So I
Hmm.
actually just like that because it feels right to me and it feels real and it feels true. So
Thank you so much to Jackie for sharing her time with us. And remember, you can follow The Light Leaks for more interviews, filmmaker spotlights, and community-led content that amplifies women and non-binary voices in film. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.